Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. With the war in Ukraine now in its third year, achieving peace remains a fraught and complex challenge. Perspectives differ dramatically. Some advocate for a decisive Ukrainian victory, while others push for negotiated settlements involving difficult compromises. Recent polling highlights shifting attitudes, with nearly 40% of Ukrainians now willing to consider territorial concessions to Russia for peace, up from 26% earlier in 2024. Joining us today on TVP World to explore these contrasting approaches is Jozef Hrabina, geopolitical risk advisor at Geopolitics. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning from Bratislava.
So we are looking at some contrasting opinions when it comes to the war in Ukraine, and even the Ukrainians themselves are sort of divided. Can you help us understand how the Ukrainian public perception and their attitude towards territorial concession has been shifting throughout this year?
Of course. It is a very unfortunate situation, but the public opinions have been shifting basically with more and more war fatigue caused by misfortunes of the Ukrainian army on the battlefield and progress of Russian army on the battlefield. We could track I would say deterioration in public opinion to the failed summer offensive of 2023, when Ukraine couldn't break through the Russian defensive fortifications on Zaporizhia front, or even further to battle for Bakhmut from the beginning of 2023. Currently, the situation is, I would say, very bad. Society now is divided amongst those who have lost their relatives and who have been fighting from 2014 against Russian aggression in Ukraine, and they want to continue fighting because they gave their lives or lives of their relatives for this war, and amongst those who are really tired of the war. What is problematic is also an economic situation in the country that is worsening every day, and the problems in Western support for Ukraine.
Right, and when it comes to the Western support, like you mentioned, we're also seeing some division on that front. Some world leaders are still touting the line of supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes, but figures such as Scholz have already kind of starting to change their tune and looking for sort of a peace negotiation. Do you think that these different narratives is also going to cause some rifts between the nations when it comes to the support?
Yes, I would take it from the Ukrainian perspective at the beginning. Many Ukrainians feel betrayed by West, which is a big issue, because we might even be looking at the dynamic when Ukraine will shift or lean towards Russia after the war, because they were really counting on the Western unanimous and as long as it takes support, which wasn't necessarily true. And now from the European or NATO perspective, we see that we had issues, and we're still having issues in mobilizing resources for this. It's not even of a political nature. It's more of a economic nature, because we see that our economies are slowing down, and we have been dealing with multiple economic crises. And also, secondly, which is, I think, even worse, and it also reflects the state of our economies, it's mobilization of our military-industrial complex and ability to support or supply Ukraine in the long run. And that's why these voices, such as Olaf Scholz, have risen, and then they started to advocate for peace, because what this war enhanced in Europe is a strategic deficiency in a great power competition against Russia, which we thought it's a weak authoritarian state.
Mm-hmm. And there are still people advocating for an outright decisive Ukrainian victory. Is that still achievable, and are people still putting their weight behind this narrative, or do you think that even people who are supportive of Ukraine winning the war are starting to slowly pull back on their support?
Pardon my strong language, but that's a pipe dream. Ukraine doesn't have resources, especially in terms of men, and NATO doesn't have enough capabilities to supply Ukraine in the long run in order to overcome or overturn the current situation on the ground, which is very bad. So we're looking at Ukraine that is on the verge of military. Ukrainian army is on the verge of collapse recently, and with the changes in politics in the West, I don't see really many positive developments happening in the coming months. So it is a very unlikely. The most likely scenario of the conflict settlement is that there will be some kind of a negotiated peace in the first half of the next year. That will be very fragile, but looking at it from the positive optics, it will give us a room to consolidate our military-industrial complex, prepare for more great power competition with Russia, because this is not the end. We should take it as such, because the history teaches us that these great power dyads are protracting for decades, and it will give us a room to consolidate Ukraine as such, because Ukraine is in a tragic state after 3 years of war, and there will be a lot of room for improvement and prepare for what's going next.
Right.
Sorry.
No, please.
Yeah, other options. Second most likely option is a Russian military victory, which is even worse, I would say, than a negotiated truce or peace. I'm afraid to call it a peace, because it's going to be very fragile peace. The least likely scenario is Ukrainian victory. So.
Right, and unfortunately, that seems to be the case. And going forward, though, the Western nations are still willing to help Ukraine at least negotiate peace from a stronger position. And if there's any upside to that, is there anything that allies in NATO, the West, United States can do to at least bolster the position going into this negotiation table to make sure that they gain the best possible outcome with this negotiation?
Yeah, it needs to be made very clear to Russia that Ukraine has an unanimous support of NATO, and that there will be a consequential action if Russia will break the peace in the future. This is a strategic imperative with which we have to go into these talks. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's going to be another betrayal for Ukraine, and we will leave basically Ukraine alone in it, which I think will not only result in a tragedy on the ground, but also in a loss of our credibility in the world. So we should look at it from this perspective, and I would say at this point, this is creating some framework of collective security is going to be crucial going forward in any format concerning some sort of a truce or peace in Ukraine.
Right. You mentioned collective security, and my question is, why does Ukraine's NATO membership remain such a contentious issue? And if NATO is not willing to accept Ukraine in its rank, is there any other format and any other, like you mentioned, collective security structure that could be built around the situation so that we don't see Russian encroachment again?
I will start with the collective security issue. We already saw in Istanbul agreements from spring 2022 that there was a collective security framework involving the U.S., UK, I think it was Germany, France, and Russia as guarantors of Ukraine's security, I believe something similar should happen. In the next treaty, and this format should really be incorporated in a peace talks. And I think this is already something that has been discussed, and it has been pre-agreed amongst the leaders that there will be some sort of oversight over Ukraine, maybe even some peacekeeping mission in a demarcation or along the demarcation lines will be established, and this is something really vital for maintaining peace in Ukraine. As far as NATO is concerned, I think it is out of question, especially due to Russia's demands. And this is, I think, looking at the current frontline dynamic, Russia is going to dictate some of the conditions for peace, and this is going to be no-go for Russia. So if we don't want to endanger some sort of a peace process that is, I think, at this point necessary, and Ukraine needs it to consolidate itself, then we should really take that in consideration, even though we don't like it, because Ukraine has its own will. It can choose its future and its fate, but this is balance of power. That's the most powerful rule of international affairs, unfortunately.
Right. Unfortunately, the situation does seem pretty dire, but thank you so much for helping us unpack and shed light on this particular issue. Really appreciate it. Thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you for having me, and have a nice day.
Cheers. And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.